November 18th, 1943, Bougainville Island, Solomon Sea. Dawn crept in slowly, the kind that made the jungle feel like it was holding its breath. Moist heat clung to the palms, to the mud, to the men who hadn't slept. Somewhere in the green wall ahead, an unseen bird cried out, then went silent. Private First Class Charles Chuck. Mohini pressed his cheek into the stock of his rifle and waited. He was 20 years old, an Oregon boy who'd grown up hunting deer in the Cascades, now lying flat in volcanic mud half a world away. His uniform was stiff with sweat and rot. His stomach was empty. In his mouth he rolled a piece of chewing gum, flat, tasteless, months old. He didn't chew it for comfort. He chewed it because it helped him stay alive. Across the Pacific, the world was on fire. The Allies were clawing their way back island by island after Pearl Harbor, and Bougainville was one more bloody step toward Japan itself. To the maps in Washington, this island was a red pin. To the men on the ground, it was a death trap of vines, insects, and invisible enemies who knew the terrain better than any outsider ever could. The Japanese held the high ground, hidden bunkers, perfect fields of fire. Every American advance stalled under sudden, precise shots that came from nowhere and vanished just as fast. So the Marines answered with snipers. Chuck had been attached to a forward unit tasked with something no one talked about openly. He wasn't there to charge beaches or raise flags. He was there to erase silhouettes from the jungle, quietly, efficiently and alone. Hours passed. Sweat ran into his eyes. Ants crawled over his hands. He didn't move. Then movement. A flicker of fabric, a helmet edge, a Japanese officer scanning the tree line. Confident, exposed for just a second too long. Chuck exhaled. The rifle cracked once. The jungle swallowed the sound. The officer dropped. No cheers, no witnesses, just another body reclaimed by the island. By mid-morning, the heat became unbearable. Most men would have shifted, stretched, wiped their face. Chuck didn't. Any motion could betray him. Any sound could draw fire. That was when the gum mattered. He pressed it carefully, deliberately against the metal edge of his rifle sling, silencing the faint clink it made when he adjusted his grip. Later he'd use it again, sealing a loose piece of gear, masking a sound that could have meant death. Tiny decisions, improvised solutions, the kind no manual ever taught. By noon, Japanese troops were moving again, more cautiously now. They'd realized someone was hunting them, and Chuck was still there, still watching, still counting breaths. By sunset, the Marines on the line would whisper about an unseen protector, about enemy patrols that never returned, about a sniper who hadn't moved all day. They didn't know how many had fallen. They only knew the pressure had lifted for now. In the deepening shadows of Bougainville, Chuck eased the gum from his fingers, stuck it back between his teeth, and settled in for the night. The day wasn't over yet. November 18th, 1943, late afternoon. Bougainville Island. The jungle began to change its voice as the sun dipped lower. Cicadas rose in volume. Leaves stirred without wind. And somewhere ahead, Chuck Mohini heard what every sniper learned to fear. Not footsteps, not gunfire, but silence. The kind that meant the enemy had stopped moving and started watching. The Japanese were adapting. They moved differently now. No straight patrols, no officers standing tall. Men crawled. Others waited in trees. A helmet appeared, then vanished. A rifle barrel reflected a brief flash of dying sunlight. Chuck didn't rush. He never rushed. He let the gum soften between his molars as he slowed his breathing, counting heartbeats the way his instructor had taught him back in California. 4 beats in, 4 beats out. The jungle sweat cooled on his spine as clouds swallowed the sun. Then he saw it, a shadow that didn't belong to the foliage. Too angular, too still. A Japanese sniper. The man was good, well camouflaged, patient, confident. But he'd made one mistake. He'd chosen a position that overlooked a Marine supply route. Chuck had been watching that trail since dawn. The crosshairs drifted, settled. One shot, the shadow collapsed, sliding soundlessly down the tree trunk and into the undergrowth. That was when the jungle exploded. Rifles cracked from 3 directions at once. Bullets snapped through leaves, smacking into bark inches from Chuck's head. The Japanese had triangulated his position faster than he'd expected. He didn't run. He rolled, slowly, deliberately, using the uneven ground to break line of sight. He pressed himself into a shallow depression filled with muddy water, letting it soak his uniform, his hair, his face. He didn't wipe his eyes. He didn't blink. Minutes passed. The firing stopped. Japanese voices drifted closer now. Short commands, clipped tones. They were confident again. They thought they'd pinned him. Chuck slid the gum from his mouth and pressed it into the bolt of his rifle, dulling the faint metallic click as he chambered the next round. A sound no one would ever hear. The first soldier stepped into view, rifle raised, eyes scanning the wrong direction. The shot took him through the chest. The second man froze, just long enough to die where he stood. The third turned and ran. Chuck didn't chase. He never chased. By nightfall, Japanese movement along the sector had nearly stopped. Patrols that ventured out didn't come back. Runners were sent. They vanished too. Word spread through the enemy lines that an American sniper was operating. Alone, methodical, relentless, impossible to spot. As darkness settled over Bougainville, Chuck remained in position, body aching, fingers stiff, senses stretched thin. He had stopped counting hours. He had started counting targets. And the night was just beginning. November 18th, 1943, after nightfall. Bougainville Island. Night in the jungle didn't bring darkness, it brought pressure. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if the island itself leaned closer. Visibility dropped to a few yards, but the sounds multiplied. Insects screamed. Branches snapped. Somewhere far off, artillery thudded like a distant storm. Chuck Mahoney stayed exactly where he was. He had learned early that night favored the patient, not the brave. The Japanese believed darkness gave them cover. Chuck knew better. At night, men relaxed. They whispered. They smoked. They forgot they were being watched. A faint orange glow flickered deep in the trees. A cigarette. Chuck waited. The glow appeared again, closer this time. A small patrol moving cautiously, convinced they were hidden. One man laughed softly. Another shushed him. They were tired, hungry, angry that daylight had taken so many of their own. Chuck adjusted his rifle a fraction of an inch. The gum held firm, deadening every micro sound as he moved. The cigarette flared once more. He fired. The glow vanished instantly, replaced by a body collapsing into the brush. The patrol scattered in panic, shouting, firing blindly into the dark. Muzzle flashes lit the jungle in brief, violent snapshots. Chuck shifted position again, crawling backward on his elbows, letting the noise betray them, not him. Another silhouette burst through the undergrowth. One shot, then another. Each round was deliberate, controlled, no wasted motion, no wasted breath. The Japanese began firing at shadows, at trees, at memories. Their fear was audible now. Orders overlapped. Boots ran in every direction. In the confusion, men crossed open ground they never would have touched in daylight. Chuck punished every mistake. By midnight, the jungle fell quiet again. Too quiet. Chuck knew what that meant. The enemy had stopped hunting him and started avoiding the entire sector. For the Marines pinned down nearby, the effect was immediate. Enemy fire eased. Supply runners moved again. Wounded men were pulled back without taking new hits. They didn't know why the pressure had lifted. They only knew someone was out there, alone, still working. Chuck lay motionless, muscles screaming, eyes burning from hours without blinking. He rolled the gum back into his mouth, jaw tightening as he fought off exhaustion. He had lost count now, not because the numbers didn't matter, but because dawn was coming. And daylight always revealed what night tried to hide. November 19th, 1943, just before dawn. Bougainville Island. The jungle exhaled as the sky began to pale. That moment, when night loosens its grip but day hasn't yet taken control, was the most dangerous time to be alive. Shadows stretched and shifted. Shapes lied. Men grew careless, thinking the darkness had already saved them. Chuck Mahoney had not moved for hours. Mud had dried into his sleeves. His legs were numb. His fingers felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. He flexed them slowly, silently, the way he'd learned to do without giving himself away. Then he heard it. Boots, many of them. The Japanese were advancing again, this time in strength. A coordinated sweep, spread wide, methodical. They had accepted what they were facing now. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chaos. This was a sniper. Chuck scanned left to right, filtering movement from deception. He spotted them one by one, riflemen crouched low, an NCO signaling with his hand, a machine gun team setting up just inside the tree line. They were preparing to lock the area down. He chose the leader. One breath, one squeeze. The NCO fell backward without a sound. The reaction was instant. The machine gun opened up, shredding foliage. Rifle fire followed. The jungle shook with noise, but Chuck was already gone, sliding into a new position, angling away, never moving in a straight line. From his new vantage point, he could see their mistake. They were firing toward where he had been. Chuck worked calmly now, like a craftsman finishing a long job. He took the machine gun loader as he reached for ammunition. Then the gunner, frozen in disbelief. Then a runner trying to pull the weapon free. Each shot broke momentum. Each body slowed the advance. The Japanese tried flanking again, but the terrain betrayed them. Narrow paths, exposed crossings. Chuck knew the ground now better than they did. By the time the sun finally broke through the canopy, shafts of light cutting through smoke and mist. The clearing ahead was littered with stillness. No movement, no commands, just fallen men and abandoned gear. Elsewhere on the line, Marines realized something extraordinary had happened. The enemy pressure that had been grinding them down for days had vanished almost overnight. Patrols reported empty positions, weapons left behind, trails stained with blood and dragged bodies. When Chuck finally pulled back, long after the fighting had shifted elsewhere, an officer quietly counted confirmed enemy dead in his sector. The number stopped him cold. Dozens. More than any single Marine unit had claimed in the same span. Chuck didn't argue. He didn't boast. He didn't even speak much at all. He just took another piece of gum from his pocket, placed it carefully between his teeth, and prepared to move again. Because the war wasn't done with him yet. November 19th, 1943, midday, Bougainville Island. By noon, the jungle smelled different. Gunpowder lingered beneath the rot and damp leaves, and flies had begun to gather where bodies lay undiscovered. The sun burned straight down now, turning helmets into ovens and rifles into branding irons. Chuck Mahoney moved slowly through the aftermath of the morning's fight, careful not to leave a trail. Every step was measured, every pause deliberate. He wasn't advancing, he was disappearing. That was the paradox of a sniper's work. The more effective you were, the more dangerous it became to remain. Behind Japanese lines, confusion was spreading. Units reported losses without ever seeing the enemy. Officers demanded explanations that no one could give. Some blamed ghosts, others blamed incompetence. A few, more honest, admitted the truth. An American sniper was dismantling their control of the sector. Chuck settled into a new hide overlooking a narrow jungle trail. A natural choke point the Japanese had used all week. He had chewed his gum down to nothing now, but he kept it anyway, pressing it into place to silence a loose strap on his back. Improvised, practical, alive. Hours passed. Then the trail came alive. A column of Japanese soldiers moved through cautiously, weapons up, spacing tight. They were nervous, eyes darting, heads low. They had learned fear, but fear didn't stop orders. Chuck watched them pass the first marker, then the second. He didn't fire at the front. He waited until the middle of the column entered the kill zone. The first shot dropped a soldier instantly. The second took the man behind him before the echo faded. Panic rippled through the column. Men stumbling over each other, firing wildly into the trees. Chuck shifted position again, always shifting. From a new angle, he took the radio operator, then the officer trying to restore order. Without leadership, the column dissolved into chaos. Some ran forward, others retreated straight into open ground. Each mistake was final. By mid-afternoon, Japanese movement along the trail ceased entirely. Bodies lay where they had fallen, untouched. No recovery teams came, no counter-snipers followed. The message was clear. This ground was no longer theirs. When Chuck finally withdrew to report in, his commanding officer listened in silence as numbers were quietly tallied, confirmed kills, probable kills, engagements across less than a single day. The total was staggering. Even seasoned Marines exchanged looks they didn't want to explain. Chuck said nothing. He sat on an ammo crate, shoulders slumped, exhaustion finally catching up to him. He reached into his pocket, found one last piece of gum, and placed it in his mouth with the same calm ritual as always. For him, it wasn't about numbers. It was about keeping his fellow Marines alive for one more night. And tomorrow, the jungle would demand its price again. November 20th, 1943, early morning. Bougainville Island. Morning came without ceremony. No bugles, no announcements, just the slow return of light and the realization that both sides had survived another night. The jungle looked unchanged, but it wasn't. Too many paths were empty now. Too many voices were missing. Chuck Mawhinney woke where he'd slept, sitting upright against a tree, rifle still across his lap. He hadn't meant to sleep. His body had simply shut him down. He checked his rifle first, then his surroundings. Only after that did he allow himself a breath. Orders filtered in quietly. Japanese resistance had pulled back deeper into the interior. The Marines were advancing again, but cautiously. No one trusted the silence. Chuck was reassigned forward. As he moved, he passed men he'd never spoken to, Marines who nodded at him with a look that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite fear. They didn't know his name. They didn't need to. They knew what had happened in the jungle ahead. He took up a new position overlooking a shallow ravine. From here, he could see abandoned Japanese packs, scattered ammunition, even a field radio smashed in frustration. The enemy hadn't just retreated. They'd broken. But broken men were still dangerous. Late morning, movement flickered near the ravine's edge. A small group, 5, maybe 6 Japanese soldiers, moving carefully, desperate, trying to slip through the gaps left by the chaos. Chuck watched them for a long moment. They weren't charging. They weren't hunting. They were trying to survive. His jaw tightened. War didn't care about intention. He fired once. Then again, the ravine echoed briefly, then went still. By midday, word reached headquarters. Japanese activity in the sector had collapsed entirely. Commanders spoke of repositioning units, of exploiting momentum, of pushing inland while the enemy regrouped. No one mentioned the cost paid in the trees. That afternoon, an intelligence officer sat with a notebook and tried to reconcile reports, patrol logs, sniper confirmations, field observations. The numbers didn't line up until they did. 1 Marine, 1 sector, 1 day. The figure was almost unbelievable. When Chuck was told, quietly without ceremony, he didn't react. He just stared at the ground, jaw working the last of his gum until there was nothing left to chew. Later he would say very little about Bougainville, not because it wasn't important, but because it was too clear in his memory. The smells, the sounds, the faces he never saw clearly enough to remember. As the sun dipped again toward the horizon, Chuck returned to his position. Rifle steady, eyes forward. Because legends didn't exist in the jungle. Only men who stayed alive long enough to be remembered. November 20th, 1943, late afternoon. Bougainville Island. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in thin golden shafts. But the jungle offered no comfort. Shadows clung to every tree and undergrowth, and the heat pressed down like an invisible weight. Chuck Mawhinney remained motionless, a ghost among ghosts. Through the binoculars, he watched a small Japanese patrol attempting to recover what they could from the previous day's chaos. Ammunition, supplies, even a fallen comrade, anything of value they could drag away before dark. Each step they took was tentative, each movement calculated, but they were predictable. Chuck adjusted his rifle, silently pressing the gum he had chewed earlier into a loose screw on the stock to mute the faintest click as he raised it. Tiny innovations like this were survival. Small details could mean life or death. The first soldier moved into the open, unaware that eyes behind leaves were watching. One squeeze of the trigger and he collapsed. Panic erupted. The second soldier hesitated, unsure of whether to flee or stand, and he too fell. The remaining men scattered, firing blindly into the trees. Chuck did not give chase. He had learned that a sniper's power was in control, not in pursuit. Every misstep by the enemy was a gift to be measured, not hurried. By dusk, the entire sector was eerily quiet. Not a single figure moved where hundreds had marched and fought the day before. The Marines in the surrounding lines were cautiously advancing, surprised at the sudden emptiness. Word began to circulate, whispered between exhausted men. One sniper had caused this. One man had dismantled an entire sector of the enemy's operations. No one had seen him move. No one had heard him approach. Chuck sat silently, the gum long gone now, chewing nothing but resolve. His body ached from hours of immobility, but his mind remained sharp, alert to the next shadow, the next flicker of movement. He understood something fundamental. Survival was not about glory. It was about patience, precision, and persistence. The jungle's nocturnal orchestra began again, crickets, distant artillery, the subtle rustle of leaves. Chuck tightened his grip on the rifle and whispered to himself, the unspoken mantra of a sniper in war. One shot, one life, one chance. Night would come again, and with it the hunt would continue. November 20th, 1943, nightfall, Bougainville Island. Darkness arrived like a curtain, swallowing the jungle whole. Shapes dissolved into black, and even the moonlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy. Every sound was amplified, drops of water falling from leaves, the distant splash of artillery in the jungle beyond, the whisper of a lizard across the mud. Chuck Mohini lay flat against the earth, eyes barely open, rifle cradled against his shoulder. He had been awake for more than 48 hours, but exhaustion was a luxury he could not afford. His body begged for rest, but the jungle offered no mercy. From the shadows, movement flickered, a single pair of boots carefully stepping through mud, the glint of a helmet catching what little light there was. Chuck's finger hovered over the trigger. His jaw clenched. He placed a small piece of chewed gum over a metal clip on his rifle, muting the faintest sound. Survival was in the details. The patrol was small, 3 men cautious, thinking darkness was their ally. But Chuck had learned that the jungle's darkness favored patience, not speed. He exhaled slowly, aligning his sights. 1 shot, the first man dropped silently. 2 shots. The second fell into the undergrowth, arms flailing as he tried to regain balance. The third froze, then bolted straight into the line of fire Chuck had calculated. A final shot ended it. The patrol was annihilated before they had even realized they were hunted. The jungle returned to stillness. The only sound, the distant echoes of prior battles and the soft hum of insects. Somewhere Marines whispered about the ghost in the trees. They had heard reports of an unseen sniper dismantling entire patrols, of enemy forces melting away like mist under a rising sun. Chuck lay back, body rigid but mind alert. He understood that war was as much a mental contest as a physical one. Every decision, every second of restraint, every improvised trick, like the piece of gum that had saved his life more than once, was a calculation of survival. He allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. One day, 38 confirmed enemy dead. 1 man, and yet the weight of those lives pressed down on him more heavily than any physical exhaustion. The night deepened, and somewhere beyond the tree line, new patrols would try again. Chuck knew they would. He also knew that the jungle had already chosen him as its guardian for this sector. He didn't move. He didn't celebrate. He waited. November 21st, 1943, pre-dawn, Bougainville Island. The jungle had grown quiet, but the tension was thicker than the humid air. Every rustle, every faint crack of a branch carried meaning. Chuck Mohini remained motionless, pressed against the cold, damp earth. His rifle rested on his shoulder, sights aligned, senses stretched to the limit. He had survived 2 days in this hellish patch of Solomon soil, and now the final hours of his mission approached. Reports filtered back that Japanese forces were attempting to regroup farther inland, sending small reconnaissance parties to test the perimeter. Each movement was calculated, but Chuck had become more than a man. He had become a shadow, an unseen predator. A patrol appeared, 5 men moving slowly, the first light of dawn revealing their shapes only partially. They were cautious, nervous, expecting ambush, but unaware they had already walked into one. Chuck exhaled slowly. 1, 2, 3 breaths. He pressed his finger to the trigger, the gum over the loose bolt, keeping even the faintest click silent. The first man dropped before he could signal. The second, trying to escape, stumbled over roots and mud. Chuck fired again. The others froze, panic consuming coordination. One ran straight into the line Chuck had calculated. Another tripped and fell, and the last scrambled into the underbrush, disappearing into the dense foliage, but not unscathed. By the time the sun broke over the horizon, the sector was completely silent. No patrols, no enemy formations, only the echoes of gunfire and the smell of spent rounds. Nearby, Marines cautiously advanced to assess the situation. They found the trails littered with bodies, weapons abandoned, and signs of frantic retreat. Whispers spread through the ranks. One sniper, operating alone, had inflicted losses no company could claim. Chuck didn't linger. He wiped mud from his face, checked his rifle, and allowed himself the briefest stretch of aching limbs. He had become a ghost in the jungle, a force that no enemy could see, but one whose presence reshaped the battlefield. He reached into his pocket for the last piece of gum. He placed it between his teeth, a small ritual in the midst of chaos. There was still work to do, still a jungle to navigate, and still men who depended on him surviving one more day. The island exhaled around him, alive with danger, alive with uncertainty, but for now, the pressure had eased. Chuck Mawhinney, lone sniper, remained unseen. November 21st, 1943, morning, Bougainville Island. Dawn broke fully, spilling pale light through the canopy and illuminating the devastation of the last 48 hours. The jungle, so alive with sound and movement yesterday, now felt almost sacred in its silence. Fallen branches, discarded helmets, and the bodies of soldiers, both Japanese and untouched by the sun, marked the brutal calculus of survival. Chuck Mawhinney emerged slowly from his hiding place, legs stiff, muscles screaming, rifle still at the ready. The gum he had relied on for hours of deadly precision was gone, but its purpose remained imprinted in his methodical movements. Patience, silence, control. Every choice had saved his life. Every calculation had ended another's. He walked through the aftermath, careful not to disturb what remained, observing the patterns of retreat, the empty spaces where enemy patrols once moved with confidence. 38 Japanese soldiers had fallen under his watch in just a single day. A staggering number for one man, unseen, unassisted, and unheralded. Nearby Marines surveyed the cleared paths and abandoned positions in awe. They exchanged quiet, reverent glances, understanding instinctively that the balance of this sector had shifted not through numbers or artillery, but by one man's relentless precision and unwavering discipline. Chuck did not linger for praise. He had never sought it. He did not revel in the tally of lives taken. He carried only the burden of the knowledge that every action had consequences, and that the jungle never forgave mistakes, his or anyone else's. As he disappeared back into the thick green, blending with shadows and trees, he became legend in whispers, the ghost sniper of Bougainville. Soldiers would tell stories of the unseen hand that protected them, of the enemy that vanished as if the jungle itself had turned against them.